day 573 of the Trump administration. And today saw that rare hybrid in the short history of this White House. A big shiny object, a giant political distraction, in this case designed to attract attention away from the damage being caused by Omarosa's book, but an action underlying the shiny object that has real and potentially chilling consequences. Today, President Trump revoked the security clearance of this man, former CIA Director John Brennan. Brennan, who we should point out these days is a senior national security and intelligence analyst for both NBC and NBC News and MSNBC, is also a consistent and strident critic of this president. He was also one of the first officials to sound the alarm on Russian meddling in our 2016 election. Here is the president tonight quoting one of his supporters who appeared on Fox News. John Brennan is a stain on the country. We deserve better than this. From the briefing room earlier today, here is how the White House press secretary laid out the reasons for stripping Brennan's clearance while threatening to take similar action against other Trump critics.
Any benefits that senior officials might glean from consultations with Mr. Brennan are now outweighed by the risks posed by his erratic conduct and behavior. Mr. Brennan has recently leveraged his status as a former high-ranking official with access to highly sensitive information to make a series of unfounded and outrageous allegations, wild outbursts on the internet and television about this administration. As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
Not only are they all Trump critics, some of those under evaluation are closely tied, as you know, to the Russia investigation. Our own Andrea Mitchell reports the president's own director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, was not aware in advance of today's announcement, nor were other senior intelligence officials. The White House was asked for evidence that John Brennan had actually somehow abused his clearance, but declined to provide any.
Does this administration have any reason to believe or evidence to suggest Brennan has misused classified information or monetized his access to it, as was alleged earlier by this administration?
Again, I've laid out the reasons for the decision that was made on this specific instance. We'll continue to review the other actions. Andrew?
We assume by the absence of you not saying those things, you didn't find any evidence of that?
No, I wouldn't make any assumptions. I'm telling you what the decision was based off on in this case.
Today's statement pulling Brennan's security clearance was dated July 26. That was a big indicator that it was standing by on the skids, ready for weeks, and was pulled out and announced just today. John Brennan is famously one of the stone-cold faces in that photo taken in the White House Situation Room the night Osama bin Laden was killed. Finding bin Laden was a huge part of his job and his life's work after 9/11. Phil Rucker of the Washington Post put this out tonight. It shows Brennan's major postings in his decades of service to this country, much of it clandestine. CIA Station Chief, Saudi Arabia. CIA Station Chief, Director of Terrorist Threat Integration Center, Director of National Counterterrorism Center, White House Homeland Security Advisor, CIA Director, briefed 3 presidents. Earlier, Brennan himself spoke by phone with our colleague Nicole Wallace.
I do believe that Mr. Trump decided to take this action, as he's done with others, to try to intimidate and suppress any criticism of him or his administration. And revoking my security clearances is his way of trying to get back at me. And this is not going to deter me at all. I'm going to continue to speak out. I think he fears individuals who could damage him, could damage his standing among the American people. I mean, look at the way he's been referring to Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller, who is a national treasure, an icon within the law enforcement and justice communities, who's doing his level best to investigate Russian interference in the election. And the denigration of Bob Mueller, as well as his team of investigators, is reprehensible. I think Mr. Trump is getting more and more concerned, more and more desperate, I would say more and more frightened, as there is closer and closer magnification of some of the things that those around him have been involved in.
Just a short time ago tonight, two other intel chiefs whose clearances are under review also spoke out.
The White House just messaged the entire American intelligence community. If you stand up and say things that upset the president or with which he disagrees, he will punish you. And that is a horrible message to be sending to folks who are there to tell you objective truth.
The bigger issue here, Chris, to me, is what this implies, the implications of this for the First Amendment. And the other question I have is, where does this end?
Both of those two gentlemen have 50-plus years experience. Let's bring in our leadoff panel for another busy Wednesday night. The aforementioned Andrea Mitchell, NBC News chief foreign affairs correspondent, host of Andrea Mitchell Reports, noon Eastern, weekdays on this network. Clint Watts back with us as well, a former FBI special agent and member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Welcome to you both and good evening. Andrea, you get to define this. Is this a giant, shiny object or an action with deep consequences or both?
It's both. I mean, you are an astute observer. You recognize a bright, shiny object. The timing, clearly this was dated July 26th, released today. It's a distraction from Omarosa and all the rest of the reality TV show that the White House has become. That said, there are real implications of this. First Amendment, as Jim Clapper suggested, and as Mike Hayden said, a real warning, a chilling effect, not just to the outside commentators, they're tough, they can make their own decisions what to do, but to the intelligence community, who are also tough. But they have to stand up to this president. Now they see what the repercussions. One of those on that list of possible future revocation of security clearances is, Bruce Orr, who is in the Justice Department right now and had a working relationship with an asset, Christopher Steele, on the dossier. That was enough to put him on the list. It's really remarkable. It's unprecedented. And the irony here, sadly, is that the whole reason that Mike Hayden helped establish the precedent that former CIA directors would keep their clearances is to help new administrations be able to quickly talk to their predecessors and find out if something is unusual, if it's, alarming, something in Pakistan, something in Saudi Arabia. That is the whole point, that they are able to quickly, without having to go through a long clearance process, talk to someone like John Brennan and say, what about this guy we just picked up? What about his relatives? What do you know? What should we be alert to? What do you think is happening in Saudi?
And more on that very point a bit later on in this conversation. Hey, Peter Baker, there's reason to believe the president has again tonight pulled a Lester Holt. And here's what I mean by that. We have his famous comment, Lester looked at, as he put it, Trump and Russia. And yes, of course, he was going to fire Comey. Well, tonight in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, the president says he was going to do this last week, but it was too hectic, perhaps forgetting he was on vacation. And then there is this. I call it the rigged witch hunt. It's a sham, Mr. Trump said in an interview. So talking about what he did to Brennan, and these people led it, he added. So I think it's something that had to be done. So doesn't that, Peter, right there blow up any appearance of process or rigor that went into this that the press secretary tried to underscore today in the briefing room?
Yeah, that's right. Look, he makes very clear that the criteria for him is the people who are investigating him or started the investigation to him or somehow are linked to the investigation to him. In other words, the people that he considers to be, out to get him. This isn't obviously a concern about the use of classified information. They don't have any evidence that they've made public about any misuse of classified information. Instead, this is a list. It's not just that, look, if there is a concern about John Brennan and something he had done, they might have handled this in a different way. If this is not about that, this is a list. Who is the list that they put out? That list is one after the other of people that President Trump has made clear he considers to be his enemies. He has gone after repeatedly on Twitter, in public settings, in all sorts of ways. And this is a list of people he wants punished because, as he told Peter Nicholas and Michael Bender from the Wall Street Journal, they were connected to the Russia investigation.
Clint Watts, we have, by my count, around 50 minutes remaining in today, East Coast time. Knowing we still have 50 minutes, I'll say this, I'll take some risk. If you enjoyed today in America, that is to say, a day free of terrorist attack on this country, it stands to reason you would want all of these ex-officials who've devoted their lives and careers to the intel business to all have their security clearances so they can all be of counsel to the people taking on that enormous burden now, correct?
That is correct. It's called eligible for access. I doubt the president actually understands the distinction. There are people who are eligible for access with a security clearance, and then you're read on to different topics.
Yeah, you're not at home following all the intel,
Exactly.
but it's so you can be read in.
That's right. And then once you are read in, you have access to the actual intelligence. That's what they do with formers. They put them eligible for access. This allows them to come back in. Let's say you're negotiating an Iran deal where you have sanctions coming up and maybe nuclear options that you're trying to restrict. You would want to bring back people that have been talking to these characters that State Department, NSA, whoever it might be, are talking to so that they can interface and get some understanding. Even more, a lot of the former intel officials, law enforcement officials, some of them have gone now into the private sector. You hear them talk about, they're trying to profit from their clearance. No, actually, that's key for public-private partnerships. It's one of the most critical dimensions right now in cybersecurity because there are only a few people in the private sector that can actually interface with the government on cybersecurity. So they've been invaluable over the past few years. These linkages are critical for the good of our national security. The only good that was done was for the Trump team today so that they could take a political shot at their adversaries.
I'm thinking of the former FBI official we have on the air who's the head of CrowdStrike now. So he takes his government experience. He's in the web business privately, but if they need him back, they know he's reputable and served his country if they need to read him in on a problem.
Not only can they read him in on it, he understands all the participants.
Sean Henry is
Yes, Sean Henry. And he understands all the participants, all the procedures, and he knows how the U.S. government works. This is the key distinction. You can't just pull someone off the street and say, tell me about this. They don't even have any context for it. So it's not good for our national security, and it's definitely not good for America.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.